Lesson 5, more about preacher and his work. And there's always been a need for sound preaching, gospel preachers who preach the truth, the whole truth. Paul urged Titus to speak these things which become sound doctrine in Titus 2:1. And he urged Timothy in 1 Timothy 1:3 to charge some that they might teach no other doctrine. And as a congregation, we need to stand behind him as he preaches the truth, preaches the whole truth. If we don't, we will suffer the consequences for it. If we don't stand behind sound preaching, he will not stay sound for long. He will become disenchanted, and if you don't support him, because it will be a disappointment to him to speak the truth. Just think of how Jeremiah was. He was a prophet of God. He was God's mouthpiece. But how many people did he convert in his lifetime? None. You think he was disappointed? You think he was saddened by that?
To apply it to every other member.
Yeah.
It's difficult to tell somebody something you know they don't want to hear. Somebody's hurt, you've got to tell somebody that something is wrong, something is bad, something is negative. It's hard. The preacher has to tell people from the pulpit, if you want sound doctrine, the truth about marriage, divorce, and remarriage. The truth about homosexual marriage and the truth about marriage in general. I mean, that's a big cup now. The truth about, and if the congregation doesn't stand behind him and back him up, every time he says anything about marriage, he gets beat down. It's very hard to stand up and speak anything, much less truth. And as Jane Joe member, you don't want to tell your friend. It's hard. You know how hard it is for you to go talk to your friend about it. He's got everybody in the church that's supposed to equip him, not necessarily showing the kind of support that they should for the truth. It gets really hard to do that job.
I think a lot of times we have a tendency to lift the preacher up above everybody else. I'm thinking he's better than everybody else, because he's preaching God's word. And he's not. He's just a Christian, just like everyone else. He's got the same frailties. He's got the same issues of life. He's just a man who happens to be preaching God's word.
He shouldn't be. Elders kind of get lifted up, and I understand why, and I respect that, because they are our leaders.
Right.
A lot of people mistakenly put a preacher in that same category because of his knowledge. And I'm not saying that he doesn't have more Bible knowledge. He got lucky, chose, whatever you want to call it. I say chose to endeavor to spend more time in God's Word. Yeah. Went and got an education, hopefully from a sound preaching school. So he does know a little more about God. That's his job, yes. But he's still, like you were saying, Jane or Joe, Joe member. His wife is still Jane member. She doesn't necessarily, there's a lot of people that do lift him up, and a lot of times they don't want to be lifted up. They want to be treated just like Jane and Joe. Preacher in his wife. And I say Jane because, not because she needs to be preaching, but a lot of people look at the whole family, the wife, the husband, the kids, and all of them. Yeah. And they hold you to this standard. But my kids can, but we're only here. And it's very difficult.
It makes it hard on the children too at times, because they're always under the microscope. They're always being watched. And you're the preacher's kid and you're doing this. Well, it doesn't matter if he's a preacher's kid or not. Or you're doing this.
Growing up, there was lots of kids that I knew that were preacher's kids. Now they were the Baptist preacher's kids and Methodist preacher's kids. They were preacher's kids. And they were the ones that were the wildest. And it was one of those that preacher's kid had a really bad rap, at least where I lived, those that were around me. It was like, ooh, I don't want to be married to a preacher because I wouldn't want my kids like that, kind of a thing. So, but I think it's because they're under such pressure all the time. So,
You know, well, typically, I mean, you would hope that the preacher knows more about the Bible than the people he's preaching to, you know. So there is that tendency to lift them up simply because of the amount of knowledge that they possess. You know, and that's not the way it should be. I mean, his reward should be the preaching. And his reward should be the support he gets from the congregation.
Philip would tell you in a heartbeat, yes, correct me if I've said something wrong, preferably in a way so that I can correct it while we're all still here before anybody leaves the building.
Mm-hmm.
But if I've said something that you just disagree with, but it's not scripturally wrong, don't beat me over the head with it just because you disagree. I'm happy to sit down with you and discuss your opinion, but don't beat me over the head. We were talking about supporting.
Yeah.
And so it's one of those, a preacher should be happy to sit down and discuss differences of opinion, and as long as it's not a salvation issue, it shouldn't be a big deal. But it's hard to sometimes take that constant, I disagree with that. I disagree with that.
In case you haven't noticed, she's a preacher's wife. She happens to know quite a bit about this subject from life's experience. Let's see what are some things to help him do a better job. A good education. Good education, you know. If someone don't know how to talk right, you know, it kind of makes you wonder about what they're saying, you know.
It doesn't really matter so long as the people understand.
But that's you know, we tend to judge people on how they speak. You know, if you have someone who mispronounces words or, you know, doesn't use the right, you know, tense, verb tense or something like this, you know, you're wondering, oh, but if you know, a preacher gets up there and he's using, you know, $4 words and, you know, all these different, we tend to think differently from them. We think, well, this man's more educated, so he must know more. And that's not necessarily the case. You know, someone can take God's word who's not very educated but has very good common sense and can bring a lesson that is very useful in a certain application. In certain cases, better than someone who's got a PhD, because he's actually preaching a lesson that's usable rather than preaching a lesson that the theory is this. Now, nobody cares what the theory is. What is today's application? What are we doing today about it? So, a good education. I mean, we tend to judge people by the way they talk. You know, be that bad or good. I mean, that's human nature. So, you know, we shouldn't judge their souls by the way they talk. You know, if they're up here preaching God's word and they're preaching truth, that's what counts. That's what matters. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with an education. I think it's great if you can, if you're the kind of person who can go to a college and, you know, get you a PhD and whatever. That's great, but not everybody's like that.
Well, the preaching schools, as long as it's a sound preaching school, you get like a 4-year college education condensed into a 2-year time frame. Most of them are only 2 years. But it gives you a good solid foundation.
Absolutely.
But you've got to, like you said, you've got to be prepared to work, because it ain't going to be easy.
And going through school is work, be it preaching school or 4-year college. Yeah, there's some people have to work at it harder than others. And that's true in life, and it's true in preaching school. There are going to be people who can, I won't say breeze through preaching school, because I don't think anybody breezes through preaching school. Because there's a lot of information that you have to process, like David was saying on Sunday. He said, you know, so much you have to process each week, and it's continuous. You're always growing. So we need to help the preacher. How can we help the preacher with a good education?
You can support preaching students when they're going to school.
You can support preaching students.
When you have a preacher, encourage him to go and hear others at lectureships, gospel meetings, not necessarily all the time because you want to hear it preach to y'all, but give them freedom to go and hear others that may be different, educated at different schools, preaching, educated, differently, more eloquent speakers, less eloquent, just give them an opportunity to go and sit at somebody else and speak. Because you never know, we may both look at the same passage, but I see this application and you see that application, and neither one is wrong.
Okay. So what would you call that in the lay world? Continuing education. You continue, because there are a good preacher will enjoy good preaching better than anyone else. And he needs that uplifting encouragement also. He needs that feeding also. Not only to feed others, but to help him grow also. So we need to encourage the preacher to attend lectureships, to further his education, and to get away and, kind of recuperate for time.
It gets him excited because he's not the only one that's preaching truth.
Yeah.
I mean, just because where we're at, Philip has to teach Wednesday night Bible class, Sunday morning Bible class, and a Sunday morning lesson, and a Sunday night lesson. Sometimes he'll have to do the Wednesday night Devo as well because whoever was supposed to do it didn't show up, which is not a bad thing. None of that is bad. He's a preacher. That's fine. But how is he going to get refueled if all he's doing, and how is he going to be able to do the other things that we as all members should be doing, going and visiting, So how is he going to grow if he never gets up and does a Wednesday night Devo? How's he going to grow? How's he going to grow? Those kind of things. It's one of those that it's encouraging to him if he's doing all the work, and I don't think he is. And I don't know what it's like here, but if you're doing a lot of the work and you're the only one you ever hear preaching, you get you feel like you're the only one standing for truth. Everybody else supports you, but
Yeah.
you're the only one preaching. It's kind of like lighting that fire again, or rekindling the fire when you get to go and hear at a lectureship multiple speakers all standing on the same side of the fence and kissing. Exactly. He said it in a way that I can remember, and it makes it make sense better than what I said last week. I don't know. Tell everybody, kind of a thing.
Treat them like a member, even as members that teach Bible classes, we want a break. We rotate out,
Yeah.
have time to sit back and learn rather than teach. And, that's one of the reasons I'm all for, when you hire a preacher, let him preach. But when it comes to teaching, other people can stand in and do that. It doesn't have to do everything.
Well, it can be rotated. Philip has no problem teaching Bible class, and I know most of the preachers that I know don't. But it's a pleasure for them to see that what they've taught from the pulpit, you got it. You're rolling with it. You're running with it. It's like I'm not just sitting up here spinning my wheels. People are actually hearing what I'm saying. They're actually growing. They're learning. When I first came here, you barely did this, and now you're doing this, and your lessons are deeper. They're more. It's like I have an effect on you as the preacher, it helps him to see that it's not just him
Yeah.
and everybody going, we done yet? I mean, when you see the members that are, as they grow, it's encouraging. And it helps him get that, I want to do deeper so that I can see, you know, if Ethan's going to challenge me tonight, you know, give me a good question and make me dig a little deeper next time. So, I mean, I got to be ready because Stephen's sitting in class tonight and he's going to give me, I know he's going to drill me, you know, kind of, because they want to learn, so they're fueling you, and adults, teenagers alike. It's that shot that.
No, there's, you know, everyone grows into the position they're in. You know, you don't suddenly become, you know, a Johnny Ramsey. You don't become a Johnny Ramsey overnight. You know, it takes a lifetime. You know, you don't. There are people out there who are better orators. They just have that ability to convey meanings when they speak, and, you know, keep your attention when they speak. Some people, you know, that's something that comes with practice. You know, when you get up before someone, it's kind of nerve-wracking, especially if you've never done it before. Get up in front of a group and you're like, and speaking from personal experience, I'm a shy person. But what struck me as impressive is Johnny Ramsey said he was an introvert. He was a very shy person. But he spoke God's word boldly. He was a very bold preacher. I thought, he doesn't sound like a shy person to me. So if there's hope for Johnny Ramsey, there's hope for me. Any more comments on education or how to help our preacher? Yeah. Learn a proper respect for time limit. Years ago, there was we used to attend what was called a summer youth series. And I don't know if the Lipsies were there with us. It was up in Sherman, I believe. But there was a gospel preacher who was giving the lesson. And the lesson's about 45 minutes long. And they broke and had, you know, soft drinks and snacks afterwards. After an hour and a half, he finally closed. That was a long lesson. It was a long lesson. He actually finished his lesson at an hour, and the last half hour was the invitation. But we were there for an hour and a half. So
It doesn't sound like it was one of those speakers that speaks and you're there an hour and a half and you're going, what? It's only been 20 minutes kind of people.
and, I was, you know, I like to hear good preaching, but there's a limit to how long someone can sit in a large group. And when you get to the invitation, you expect that this is going to be close to the end. You know, you don't expect another 30 minutes of talking and exhortation, and so it was not that good. So a sermon, I'm not saying that you should have a 15-minute sermon, you know, because there's you can't really develop a theme in 15 minutes and present a lesson in 15 minutes. You can give a devotional and kind of hit some high points, but you can't develop that lesson, that theme, and carry it through in a very short time. By the same token, you don't want to be up there droning on and on and on and on, because people are going to start going, yeah, because you have to keep people's attention. And be either bad or good, we are a society of instant gratification. We've been conditioned that way because of our upbringing, the things we have. We are very, what's the word? I can't think. We're intolerant of slowness, I guess. What was it? I was going to mention something about. Okay, well, the sermon has missed its purpose, which is to teach and edify. The saying, "The mind cannot comprehend more than the seat can endure." If you're uncomfortable, the room's hot, the preacher's droning on and on, you're not going to get much out of the lesson. You might be able to for a short time, but pretty soon you're going to lose all cohesiveness of your lesson. There was a little poem by an anonymous writer, my preacher's eyes I've never seen, though the light in them may shine. For when he prays, he closes his, and when he preaches, I close mine. Now, I have to admit that I have rolled my eyes in the back of my head a time or two. But it's not very often. Yeah. So I've had my share of days that I've done that. Good organization and presentation. The preacher should be well organized. I know that everyone has abilities. They have things that they like to do, whether it be crafts or woodworking or whatever. But if you're disorganized, how long does it take you to do something? A long time. Have you ever, those of you who cook, have you ever started cooking something and you realized, wait a second, I don't have any sugar, or we don't have any salt left? Then you have to go borrow some salt or borrow some sugar, or, well, don't have any sugar, so I'm going to put applesauce in it. That's sweetener. Or, start substituting. But, there's only so much substituting you can do. So you need to be, or the preacher needs to be organized, and the presentation needs to be well thought out. Because if you just throw out a bunch of points here and there, bless you, points here and there that have no seemingly cohesive connection, it's just a bunch of points. And we can look at, how the scriptures were written, all the letters that were written. They were written in a cohesive manner. There was a thought that went into each letter. And when it's presented in a cohesive manner and it's not rambling, it's much more enjoyable, it's more thought out, and it's easier to follow. Does that make sense? Any comments on that? Or am I just rambling? What are some things the preacher should avoid? First two things presented come from the Bible. What did Paul told Timothy to avoid?
Foolish, ignorant questions.
Foolish and unlearned questions. What would be a foolish question? Just anybody have an example of what would be what would be considered a foolish question?
Was Jesus black?
I mean, seriously, does it matter?
That does not matter. It's a foolish question. In reality, because of the area that Jesus was raised in, it was Middle Eastern. So he's not going to be that long-haired Italian that's painted in pictures. You know, he's going to be more like, you know, someone from Saudi Arabia, or he's going to have olive complexion, probably hazel eyes, dark curly hair. It's probably what he's going to look like, but nobody knows. We have no idea what Jesus looked like. All it says is, you know, there was nothing particularly striking about him. I guarantee if he looked like what's been painted, he would be different. He would stand out. Okay, unlearned questions. Unlearned questions. How would that?
Is that applying to, like, you should know this, but you just haven't learned it? Is that what it means by unlearned? Like, if you had studied it at all, you would know?
Yeah.
Like, how do I be saved? But we've just talked
Yeah.
about salvation.
Or why was the Bible being given?
Questions that we should know and
Yeah.
the answers.
What's the meaning of
Is that what
life?
it means?
Well, I mean, read it here. Okay, so when foolish and unlearned questions should be avoided. Paul told Titus to avoid foolish questions, genealogies, contentions and striving about the law. Why genealogies? Why avoid genealogies?
Everybody's arguing about how they were the sons of that Abraham, children of Abraham, and they were getting, you know, they were saved because they were the chosen people, and that had been nailed to the cross. And as of now, when Jesus died on the cross and the church is established, that don't matter.
It's right.
It's pointless. I don't care who your daddy or your granddaddy or anybody else was.
The Jews put a lot of stock in genealogies. That's why in Matthew and Mark, it tells the genealogy, it goes through the genealogy of Jesus, because they were written to a Jewish audience. And that meant a lot to the Jewish audience, because,
That
you
was
know,
fulfilling prophecy. That was showing how you fulfill prophecy.
exactly, they were fulfilling prophecies, but also the Jews, you know, if you had a priest, someone in the priesthood, they had to prove that they were a son of Aaron. They had to go through their genealogy to prove that they were, you know, a son of Aaron. Because what did the Bible say? What did the Old Testament say about priests? They had to be from Aaron's lineage. So the Jews put a lot of emphasis on genealogies. And it does not matter as a Christian who your daddy is, who your granddaddy is. and contentions and strivings about the law, according to Titus 3:9. Spending too much time with certain persons to the neglect of others. You know, that can be inadvertently done also. Because if there's a family that's seriously ill, you know, the preacher goes over and visits that family. And they go visit that family and go visit the family. But they're not the only family in the congregation. They're not the only ones hurting. They may be the only one physically hurting, but he can't neglect everyone else for just one. So, you know, it's good that he's visiting the sick, but he's not the only one that should be visiting the sick.
It's just as a member of the church, we're all talking.
Exactly right. We're all supposed to be caring for one
We're all
another,
doing our job.
concerned.
We won't be neglecting anybody. We'll all be reaching out to each other.
If we,
Won't any of us be neglecting anybody.
if we leave it to the preacher to do, what's for us to do?
He's preparing everything that he's got to prepare, though. He's only got time to make one visit. Do I go visit the person in the hospital? Or do I go see somebody who's happy and healthy and may or may not be home? Well, I know I'm going to find the person in the hospital, so it may appear that he's neglecting everybody else. But it's like he's called this person, and there's the doctor this day, and this is my only free day because I'm busy preparing all this other stuff. So we've got to also make sure that we're careful that we don't judge that he's, or assume or make presumptions about what he is or isn't doing. Because he may have called your house to come visit you. You just weren't there when the phone rang.
And I think too that spending too much time with certain persons to the neglect of others, what I've seen, and I think what causes a lot of the typical quote preacher's kids mentality are those that get so wrapped up in the work that the church is expecting of them that they don't spend enough time with their family and training their own family.
Yeah.
So they end up neglecting their own at the expense or at the cost of, you know, taking care of what everybody should be doing. You know, I grew up in a large congregation of 400, and with 400 people, a preacher's hopping, and he's always on the go. And most preachers that I remember, when I think back, the ones that I experienced, they struggled because the congregation expected so much of them. You know, old women would get offended because we didn't show up at the nursing home to see them when they went through rehab. And it's like, but yet 20 other people did. And it's just because he's the preacher, he didn't come see me. You know, and it's like, what is that about? You know, or he has to show up on Wednesdays for the old women's lunch bunch. And if he doesn't show, they
I'm
get
sorry.
upset.
I
It's
called,
a serious, it's a
I
real
called
thing.
to check on a woman, and she said, "Well, you know, your husband can call too, right?" It's like she was like, "I don't need to be worried about." And it was like the preacher's, "Well, I can't call, and that's not good enough." It was one of those. We were trying to check on her as a family, but it's like divide and conquer. You take this half, I'll take this half. And I was calling all the little old women that I could, you know, I can go visit you, and then I don't have to worry. But you know, he doesn't have to go from it. So it's just, it's funny that it can, because he's got this job title that says that what people will expect of them.
We're not taking sides in needless controversy.
I think that goes back to your Titus 3:9 and your 2 Timothy 2:23.
Yeah.
It's not Old Testament stuff that we're fighting with, like the old law didn't just get abolished, and we're struggling with accepting the new law and stuff. It's just that they were arguing over the traditions of men and were they really the law back
Yeah.
then. Well, we do silly things like that now. Do we have to do the communion before or after the sermon? I grew up in every congregation I ever went to, you heard the sermon first, and then we did contribution, and then we did communion.
Should we have
Mine was better focused.
square pegs or round pegs on the coat hangers?
The carpet, it doesn't match your pews, your seats. We need to change it. You know, arguments over fruitless, pointless
foolish things that it doesn't matter, but people will engage in it. And he doesn't need to. Hey, I'm not worried about it. I'm just saying, I have literally heard of a congregation that split because they couldn't agree on the color of the carpet one time. And if you want to talk about foolish striving,
We'll just rip it up, paint the concrete.
well, you know, they couldn't agree on the color. And it was like, what difference does it make? It's going to get dirty. It's going to get walked on. What difference does it make? Does it matter what color the draperies are that are hanging there by the thing? It doesn't matter.
I think green and gold shag carpeting.
There are things that will go away when the end of the world comes. What matters is the souls that are coming in, and are they getting fed, or are they getting fed correctly and efficiently? And that's, everyone should avoid those arguments.
Well, how often do you walk into a church building and look down at the carpet?
I don't worry about it unless I've spilled something, or my daughter spilled something on it and I'm trying to clean it up, or the boys, somebody spilled something on it and I'm trying to help somebody clean it up. That's the only time I'm worried about the carpet or looking at it.
Taking certain liberties without consulting the elders, like buying office chair, office furniture. Repeating a matter before checking it out.
That causes a lot of problems.
Yes. There's a lot of that goes on in the.
And a lot of people don't take the preacher's word for it. They think that he knows what he's talking about. And if you haven't checked it out, he may not know what he's talking about.
Yeah. It causes a myriad of problems.
It shouldn't be talking about anybody.
Well, just think about it. I mean, if a preacher is someone who's looked up to, and they repeat a matter that before they checks out, and then come to find out it's not true, what does that do to his reputation as someone who's being trustworthy? Now that's not good. So preachers should avoid that, and all should avoid that. As you notice, the more you look at this, it's not just preachers; it's all of us. All of these things.
When you say people need to avoid gossiping,
Hmm?
never mind.
We should be avoiding needless controversy. You know, we buy things without the elders' consent all the time, I guess.
Well, most places the preacher does have like a spending.
there's
There are certain things.
certain things that
are
can be
established that he's going to do.
right.
And that he shouldn't have to wait till Sunday to go buy pins or to go do this or to go get,
But that's going to be a response to the fact that the Lord's money, let's not be.
Yeah. But if he goes out and buys a new church van without authorization, that can cause some problems.
Where do you get the money to buy that?
The church funds, the orphan funds. Preaching a fiery departure sermon of vengeance. I don't think I've ever heard one of those, except on TV. Did you ever watch that movie Pollyanna in the 60s? He could rattle the chandeliers when he was preaching. Not to say there's not times when a preacher has to give a lesson that's distasteful to everyone or to a lot of people. There are things that sometimes just have to be preached. And sometimes toes have to be stepped on.
Most of the preachers that I know or I've ever heard speak will tell you that the toe stomping starts right here. There, it starts at the pulpit and it comes this way. 'Cause he's tromping his own toes. Every one of them I've ever spoken to says, preparing for this lesson, I realized that I was struggling in this area more than I thought I was, or I didn't realize, or when they get done with it, they're like, now that I'm thinking about it, keep me in your prayers, because this is an area of my life that I do need to improve on, or
Yeah.
something like that. So most of them will tell you that toe tromping comes straight down first and then goes out. So don't feel like you're the only one if you're sitting there in the pews and with the seats and you feel like you're getting your toes tromped.
And like I said before, usually the teacher or the preacher gets more out of the lesson than knows he's preaching or teaching too.
If he's doing what he's supposed to be doing and being careful of the time, he probably doesn't have time to deliver every bit of the information that he planned to give you in a Bible class or as a teacher, Bible class teacher or the preacher, but as a preacher especially, he has to skip through lots of what he had planned to give you if he's trying to be the time-conscious preacher that we talked about. Because there's a lot of times there's so much in the Bible on the subject, he's trying to throw it all in there, but he's also trying to be kind for the time.
Yeah. Well, that's about all the time for class. Are there any comments about what's been discussed so far?
I think number 8 would apply to everyone. Number 8.
Thank you for your time.